Hello, this is Pastor James Price of Trinity Lutheran Church in Ottumwa, Iowa. Welcome to another episode of the Christ for Us Bible Study Podcast, dedicated to clear biblical teaching focused on Christ crucified for us. This is a special episode. I'm interviewing Reverend Dr. Harold Ristau, the new president of Luther Classical College. He has served as a parish pastor in the province of Quebec and Ontario, right?
Right.
And as well as a chaplain for the Canadian Armed Forces. You've been a seminary professor, a missionary in Africa, and now a president of a new Lutheran college. So I'm very pleased to have you on today. So thank you for being here.
And thank you, Pastor. It's a pleasure.
Great. Well, so what I'd like what I'd like to talk about, there are a lot of things that we could talk about. You've been, you've served the church for many years. You've been a pastor, a parish pastor, as I mentioned. You've served in the armed forces. You've written books on angelology and demonology. You've been a missionary in Africa. You were on international news with the Freedom Trucker Convoy a couple years ago in Ottawa when the Canadians were fighting for their freedom. Most especially the freedom to worship Christ without being persecuted by their own government. And now you are helping get a new college started for our youth. This is a very dear in my heart because I want my children to find Lutheran spouses, to be raised in the true Lutheran faith. It seems that the Lutheran Church is bleeding out. We're losing our children. They get confirmed, they go to college, they fall away from the faith often, and they don't come back to church. And most of our churches are looking like they're more older people, and where have all the children gone? And Luther Classical College is trying to address that. So what I'd like to do is first just ask about your upbringing. You grew up Lutheran, and you grew up in Canada. Most of my parishioners don't know much about Canada. I lived in Canada for about 4 years when I went to seminary. And here, just a second. I'm just going to. I went to seminary in Canada and I got acquainted with it. But when I went, a lot of the churches are what I described. Older members, there weren't very many children, especially not people around my age. They were, they would go off to university and they wouldn't come back. So I'd like to know is just where did you grow up? What kind of a Lutheran environment did you grow up in?
Right. Yeah, so I grew up in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario, which is a real sort of haven for Lutheran immigrants, German immigrants. It's got the second largest Oktoberfest in the world next to Munich. And but that being said, though very German, it wasn't deeply a confessional area. My parents came over in the 1950s, escaped from, or my father at least, escaped from Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany under communism, and fled to Canada. And they weren't well catechized because of the wartime and so forth. And so the churches in that area, the German churches, were often more ethnically German as opposed to confessional, even though the word confessional would be on the, in their constitution and so forth. So, so what that means is when you don't have a doctrine as the unifying principle to a church body, there's going to be something else. So in the terms of Lutheran German ethnicity, it was what we call pietism. Pietism is this focus on basically your individual relationship with the Lord, and your pastor is there to help you. The sacraments are there to support you, but they really aren't, central to your faith. So, so my church experience in Kitchener-Waterloo, being Lutheran, was though I learned the small catechism, it was quite shallow. It was only until I ended up choosing to go to a Missouri Synod seminary. Well, it was actually Lutheran Church Canada Seminary. Lutheran Church Canada is in fellowship with Missouri. Originally, the Confessional Lutheran Church in Canada was a district of Missouri, and then became autonomous that for obvious reasons, so you can kind of control how things look Lutheranism in Canada. So it was doctrinally 100% Missouri. And the seminary that I went to in St. Catharines, where I ended up teaching for 5 years in St. Catharines, was kind of my first exposure to true confessional Lutheranism. And I remember in my first year of seminary, obviously we're studying the Book of Concord, which I shamefully had never heard of until that time, and reading it for the first time and saying, where's this thing been my whole life? I mean, it answered all the questions that I'd had about so many theological topics, because again, growing up Lutheran, pietistically Lutheran, ethnically kind of German, we were quite ecumenical in terms of seeing the value in all the different denominations, as long as you believed in Jesus as Savior, you were good to go, kind of thing. So,
and you credit that to like the pietist movement, or because of the German ethnic, they just wanted to have that German culture that was more important than
yeah, I mean the German culture kind of brought in pietism. If you go back further in history, I mean the Reformation was victorious for a short period of time, kind of the glorious age of the Reformation, and then the Roman Catholics basically stabbed us in the back and started to regain the territory that we'd won, and so what kind of filled in that gap when the Lutherans were quite disorganized and they didn't have strong seminaries was again pietism, which is basically kind of a weak Orthodox, if you want to call it that, version of
Right.
Lutheranism. So the state church in Germany would have been what my parents had grown up through, and the only
Right.
church they knew. So when they came over to Canada, being German speakers, that's what they would have imported. So it would have been, I don't actually know the history of my church as well as I wish I did. I poked around to try to figure out what it meant when they became accepted into Missouri. I think everybody was well intended. German refugees that claimed to be Lutheran, wanting to be part of the Lutheran church in Canada, it all made sense. But I don't think there was a lot of questions as to where do you actually stand on different doctrinal issues, even in terms of the German pastors that were then serving my church that I grew up in. It wasn't clear where they came from.
Was it German language?
Right, it was German language. So, and that was one of the problems. Not everybody spoke German in the region. So, so long story short, the pastors that we received, it wasn't clear where they had trained in Germany. Likely in state, the quote-unquote Protestant church there, which is synonymous almost with Lutheran. Unless, like even today, if you're part of the confessional church, you're part of a very small church body in Germany that's not funded by the government, right? So in any case, it was there was, again, I learned that I praise God for learning the catechism, having to learn that. We did when we introduced English services to the church, which was controversial when I was a teenager, because again the unifying principle was kind of this German ethnicity and culture. We when it was introduced, it was page 15 from the TLH that we used, which was great. So there were some really redeeming qualities, but in terms of the a doctrinal like deep Bible studies showing the uniqueness of being Lutheran as opposed to anything else wasn't really underscored. So it was only when I went to a confessional seminary where that was that all kind of came to fore, and actually exposed to a highly liturgical church service, and again really being able to explore the Lutheran confessions, and seeing how wonderful they were and how they really do they respond to the all the different heresies and worship practices, and worship practices, but the different expressions of Christianity, the whole smorgasbord of Christianity,
like the sacraments, and
right, and all that, right. So and as a teenager, I mean, I was exploring all kinds of denominations while still going to my Lutheran church. I mean, we were involved with the Pentecostal stuff, and Renewal in Missouri. I don't know if you remember that. Right. So one of the churches I was involved with, Lutheran, was essentially an RM church. So very confused in terms of just trying to find the truth, and I remember again going to seminary and just rejoicing for the first time, really grasping that salvation had nothing to do with what I do. That it's all about Christ and what Christ has done for me. So I remember just explaining who was to my wife now, at least, we were dating at the time, saying, I finally understand what the gospel is. And she said, well, what is it? And I said, I do nothing. Right? So I do nothing. It's all Christ. And then explaining that to her. Right? So she then followed, along with me and essentially becoming a Lutheran. So anyway, it was so my first year of seminary was really that eye-opening experience, and having wished though that I would have saved myself a lot of grief in my adolescence had I had access or knew about or was motivated enough to search something like the Augsburg Confession. Of course, the internet wasn't back then. You didn't just Google stuff. You didn't just say, what is Lutheran? You get a bunch of stuff showing up, right? You would go to Encyclopedia Britannica, right? And you'd say, what's Lutheranism say? And then you might get the Augsburg Confession, written somewhere in there, right? It was a different era. So with our school, Luther Classical College, one thing that excites me is that the students will be reading the Bible the first year, and part of the Book of Concord, like the large catechism. And then the second year, they'll actually be reading the Book of Concord. And I wish I had done that when I was a kid. I mean, I wish I would have had the opportunity to have gone to a Lutheran college or university, or certainly a classical one. So it's exciting to see that others can circumvent, some of the, kind of negative spiritual experiences, I guess, that I had, or at least, be fully immersed into the best that Lutheranism has at a younger age, because it took me a number of years to really, discover the gospel.
Well, obviously, the hope is there'll be a lot of pre-seminary students who will go on to seminary from Luther Classical, but not all of them by any means. So this is actually something that we want from all of our youth. We want them to read the Bible and read the Lutheran confessions and to know what they believe. I mean, I'm of the conviction that if people actually knew what we taught, they would love it. Now, obviously not, the Bible says that people are going to hate the gospel, but I think that there are lots of Christians that if they actually knew what Lutherans taught and the answers that we give from the Bible, that they would be like, that makes sense. That's the clear meaning of this text, and it would be, we wouldn't have people leaving and going to non-denom churches or the Catholic Church or some Baptist group or whatever it is. They would actually defend their Lutheran faith, and parents would, with boldness, encourage their children to remain in the Lutheran Church, because this is the truth. This gives you, as you talked about earlier, the assurance that of what the gospel is. I'm saved. I don't have to worry about going to hell because I have certainty that Christ has redeemed me.
Right. Yeah. I think converts make great Lutherans, right? Because they've explored that field, right? They've seen all the bad versions of Christianity out there, whereas kind of the quote unquote born Lutherans. Of course, we're not born Lutheran; we're baptized. But if you're only raised in the Lutheran Church, you don't realize how great it is. Until you've tasted bad food, right? You don't realize the great meal that you've got before you. Right? So I was, I've tasted the bad, and it just shows, what a wonderful meal that we have. Taste and see that the Lord is good. But I think we're bad salesmen as Lutherans, if you want to put it that way, of the gospel. We like to keep it quiet. It was Billy Graham once criticized Missouri for being, the sleeping giant or something. We're massively big at we're a notable denomination, and yet we talk a lot about evangelism and that, but we really aren't that prepared for not only defending our faith, but actually proactively attacking the false beliefs that are out there, right? We're usually on the defensive, right? We're usually behind the 8 ball when it comes to issues that arise in the world, right? We're not the first responders, right? We're usually watching what other denominations are going to do, whereas we can be those people, the first responders, saying, this is what the Bible says, and then we can say boldly, But that does take some training, some formation, right? We have a field in school called apologetics. How do you defend the faith, talk about the faith. So when I've spoken about Luther Classical College, I've often said, for me as president, for instance, I have a unique background because I not only have a foot in the world of academia, I have a foot in the world of missiology, right? Doing missions, even prior to going to Africa, spending a lot of time in my church body, involved with the mission field in Latin America, for instance, in Thailand, and I can go on about other mission experiences. And the way I see Luther Classical College is that we're creating missionaries, in whatever, however you graduate, whether you become a pastor or you don't. We expect that, we want our young people to be out in the world, shining the light of Christ, right? Not hiding it under a bushel. And that means speaking about your faith. That also means, showing the errors of others, which is uncomfortable, right? But needs to happen, right? I mean, postmodernism says that you shouldn't do that. Everything's equally valid and subjective and all that. But no, part of speaking the gospel is rebuking false, right? So falsehood. So the better your education is, the more you're able to critically think, the more you are formed by faithful Lutheran faculty who are 100% confessional, which means 100% biblical, the more you're going to have students that graduate who will be comfortable sharing their faith boldly. It's not even a question of being extrovert or introvert. Jesus doesn't make those distinctions, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's supposed to stand up. So whether you're, again, doing that as a voter, you're doing that as a mother, you're doing that as a friend to someone, or you're doing it as a missionary or pastor, I mean, we're all called to do that. So I think LCC is going to be really, terrific in terms of creating missionaries, and me leading that. That's really dear to my heart, right? We're not just going to school to make money.
Right.
Students don't go to school to make money and get better jobs, right? They go to be better worshipers of God and lovers of mankind, right? This is the best way we do both of those things.
It's really interesting that you talk about preparing them to be missionaries, essentially, because that's one of the criticisms of the Lutheran Classical College model, that it's all Lutheran faculty and only Lutheran students. And people have kind of gotten this idea, well, we want to open up our colleges to all people, and then when they come, they'll become Lutheran. Now, it hasn't actually historically worked. I mean, you have some examples, obviously, but it hasn't really historically worked that well. And actually, I think there's an argument that it's worked the other way, and that actually we've had people be pulled away by having a higher percentage of non-Lutherans in an institution. So it shows that you actually do have that concern.
Right.
You do want to reach out to the lost.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, I mean, because again, that's the greatest way we can love our neighbor, right? Tell them about Jesus. But again, in our complex, the landscape that's out there today, we can use some training, right? And in terms of think about your church. The reason that we don't see divine service as Lutherans as evangelism, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody who's not Lutheran comes to church, they don't receive communion. They can attend, but they're like a visitor, right? They're like somebody that's not part of the family feast. They're just kind of watching things from the sideline, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't cater the program to those people, and you strengthen your congregation that way, right? When you don't do that, evangelism happens when you leave. It doesn't happen during divine service. If it happened during divine service, you wouldn't be equipping your people to be better evangelists. All right, so they need that space, they need that place, that time to be equipped to be the missionaries that God's calling them to be when they leave the service. And that's how I see the school too. You go in there, you're surrounded, yes, by Lutheran faculty, it's by other Lutherans who are essentially believing the same thing, worshiping the same thing, and then when they leave there, they're going to be stronger, evangelists and missionaries and confessors of the faith. the criticism has come that, well, we're kind of creating this echo chamber and so forth. That you're just hearing this. That there's some benefit in having people of different mindsets there. In those in the school, so they can get the other perspective. Well, my argument to that is, first of all, we can give the other perspective, ourselves, even if we don't agree with it, right? I mean, that's that's something that's a normal in education, again, in cultivating critical thinking, debating clubs. That's what you train people to do. You do take the position that you don't agree with, so that you can know it better, right? And you can debunk it more effectively. But even this idea, though, that we're creating, everyone's basically kind of cookie cutter students, in this echo chamber environment, that there might have been some validity to that argument, like 150 years ago when everybody was Christian, and nobody's denying God, no one's actually trying to destroy the church. Well, we live in a day that the culture isn't neutral. Okay, it is anti-Christian. The culture, if anyone out there thinks that, the North American political religious environment is not anti-Christian, then they're an ostrich that needs to get their head out of the ground. So I don't see what the problem is of saying, hey, let's take these kids for 4 years or 2 years or whatever, and let them have that kind of retreat where they are surrounded, that we're taking them out of that anti-Christian sea, so they can kind of recover and be stronger. So when we release them out, that they're better for them. Why would somebody be? And we do get critics saying, well, it's weird that you guys, you're going to make them worship twice a day, and they have to like behave themselves and go to church. They have to hang out with other Lutherans and talk theology. Is that weird? Well, yeah, okay, fine. It is weird when you compare it to what's going on around us in education. But is it bad? Like, who wouldn't want that? Like, that's what I want my kids to undergo. And I've got 2 kids. I hope that all my daughter's married and she's not with me. She's in Canada. But my 4 boys that are with us, our hope is that they go to LCC, and frankly, we have no concerns in terms of them being ill-equipped to deal with the real world, because they're around, all these Lutherans.
There are a couple of things. One, all of these institutions have become echo chambers. Like even like the ones that have thousands and thousands of students, and we see this with them protesting kind of mindlessly, for Palestine or for whatever group that they're protesting for. We have Marxists. How did they become Marxists? I thought this. You would think that if you had the opened, if it were just like the place for freedom of ideas, there would be no Marxists, because that is a failing idea. And yet, so the whole echo chamber thing, I think it's such a weak criticism, because every institution develops a personality, and you have a certain voice that is going to be overpowering. And why would we not want that to be the voice of Scripture, the voice of the Lutheran confessions and our heritage? So talking about the mission, one important thing that I think Luther Classical College focuses on, which is very beautiful, is what mission field we're actually focusing on that has been neglected, and that is the family. Because the idea has always been like, the mission field is your neighborhood, your mission field is at work, your mission field is the people next door, and we so often neglect the children who are growing up in our homes. And what are we doing to prepare them for eternal life? So one of the things is focusing. You've already mentioned it's not about making money, although I do think that the graduates of Luther Classical College are going to be far more equipped than the average American or Canadian to get a good job and to be a good worker and have a prosperous life. But the greater focus is to be a good father and a good mother, and to put your family above your career, which is so important. It's important for women, obviously, which has been, we're seeing even in the secular world, where you have women saying, hey, you know what, feminism actually did us wrong, because I pursued this career and I don't have any children, or my children have no relationship with my children, and I'm lonely. But also with fathers too. making $200,000 a year isn't the most important thing, especially if your children don't worship with you at the end of it.
Right. Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find a school that's not stating that more clearly than we are. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? What is family? Um, again, this notion of Christian values. Classical education isn't just about wisdom, right? This is the thing, wisdom and virtue. So it's not just about intelligence. It's not just about packing information in your head. Not that that's ever really been productive, but it's not just about critical thinking, let's say, right? Or thinking well, or speaking well, writing well, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and all that. It's also about how you live, right? It's how that, we're body, soul people. We're not Gnostics. We don't demarcate, intelligence from, the brain, from, what do I do with my hands and my feet? How do I speak? And so virtue matters, and these questions of how do those Christian virtues, look in a family context, is hugely important to something like LCC, because we're very pro homeschooling. We're very pro wives opting to prioritize that as opposed to careers, outside the home, and again, we live in this culture where you hear about toxic masculinity, but mild versions of that is you just see kids in school today or just out on the street just being feminized, right? It's not okay to, in our leftist political culture, right? It's not okay to want to shoot, to learn how to shoot or hunt, or to grow a beard, or just masculine, traditionally, traits that are so associated with masculinity,
Or provide
are
for your family.
demonized. Well, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that we're trying to model as well as teach towards, again, that biblical view of, and that Lutheran view. Then obviously it's almost interchangeable terms, right? Of what it means to be a man, or what it means to be a woman. It's not to say there's no room for a tomboy type girl or a feminine type guy, when it's, that's what God's made you. Everybody's different, right? Just
Right.
because you've a lisp or something as a guy doesn't mean you're like gay or something, right? It's
Right.
just, we're all different, and at one point that was okay, when this wasn't this, the whole LGBTWXYZ plus minus negative exclamation mark, right?
Right.
That foolish movement took over, right? But we are, so we're in a position right now where we really need to, take back what has been taken away from us by the world. We've drank in the Kool-Aid when it comes to feminism. We can't even, we don't even realize the idols on high places when it comes to that topic, right?
Mhm.
To just,
It's sacred
to
cow.
just suggest that there are certain occupations that really are not fit for a woman, or it's, you're just dismissed as, as chauvinist. And so this is, not part of a curriculum of a school, but the approach that people like myself take, classically minded people who want to live lives that, again, and want to teach others to live lives and model lives that are biblical, really means we really, as a culture, as a church, as individuals, as family members, take a deep look into how misaligned we are with how God says, the family ought to operate. So one thing, like, I grew up with, in my pietistic background, we used to say the table prayer before meals, and actually after the meal, which was a great
Yeah.
Luther's table prayer,
Yeah.
which is a great tradition, right? But we never talk about religion in the home. There's never bedtime prayers, anything like that. And that's been something that, even with my first children, I'm kind of ashamed to see how I wasn't, it was pretty minuscule what I was doing in terms of prayer, even as a pastor. It was learned as time went on, and now we've got quite an enhanced worship, and this is beautiful and good, and it's just such a wonderful, edifying thing for a family, to have that gift, But I kind of, I didn't see that in other households that were Lutheran, and even other pastors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even um, you don't even see it as much as you think you should today. But now that I've actually moved to Wyoming, Casper, Wyoming, I mean, I'm surrounded by all these people that have been doing that a long time, and it's great to see um, that being more of that being kind of regained, that existing. Yet I just keep looking back at my early days as a dad and as a young man, and just feeling that I was deprived of those things. It's no one's fault, but that's just it's just sin, right? Sin's fault, the world's fault, whatever, the devil, my fault, right? Because I'm all that too, right? But we can do better at this through college, right? Because we can. The idea is that the worship these students receive, it spills out into their daily lives, into their family lives, and yeah, I mean, everybody talks about changing the world, and we can do little things to move towards that goal. Jesus isn't kidding when he says that it's going to make a difference when he sends the Holy Spirit upon the church, like we proved that in history. I mean, all the good in the world is pretty much a consequence of Christianity, right? So we ought not to devalue the importance of these kind of changes, even at a micro college like ours.
Well, and it seems like it's also a lot of iron sharpening iron, because the kids who are going to be sent, or the young adults, I should say, who are going to be sent to Luther Classical College, are predominantly kids who were raised in families that did do devotions, who were brought to church regularly, and did model that. Obviously, imperfectly. Everyone does it imperfectly. But when you have kids who you build off one another. Like me too. We had devotions growing up, but I actually had my dad was a pastor. We had a very good home life, devotional home life. But I've developed our family devotions quite a bit um, over the years. And that's just what you always do. You see how other people do things. And you say, that's a that's a good thing that I'm going to pick up, and you have to do that. It's part of being humble, and always knowing that there's room for improvement. But I guess it also kind of connects with people see it and they say, well, that's strict or that's rigid, and also there's a high standard for education. They have to learn Latin. There can be reading in Latin. There can be we don't want lazy students. We want them to go there to work hard. That's what they're there. It's not a party school. But what can you say about the culture of kindness, and love and charity that you're going to seek to cultivate? That you don't want to have a bunch of students who are going to just be trying to prove that they're better than one another and say, well, I had an even better home life. We memorized the catechism by the time we were 2, or I've read all of Virgil in Latin, and or whatever it is, that we're actually going to produce kind, loving, generous graduates who are going to go and serve their congregations that they'll become a part of, whether it's a pastor or a teacher or just a layman, or a layman. Uh, what can you say about that?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean, again, just to go back to we're not there to just make smart kids or reward smart kids. We're interested in forming them body, soul, and mind, right? And that's kind of what classical education is about, a holistic formation of the person. So back to the virtue stuff. All the virtues really have to do with love, right? And it would be highly disappointing if we had one graduate that um, you know maybe they're admitted arrogant, but if they left as arrogant as they came in, that would be a failure, right? Even if they scored really high marks. Um, the one thing when you think about you mentioned we'll be drawing from all these homeschoolers and so forth, but we won't only be drawing from them, and I think by that fact is, there's got to be charity already in place, and that'll be, again, even if you've got, kind of, lack of another way of putting it, snobby kids coming in because they think they're better than others because they had a better upbringing, because homeschooling really is the best way to go, presuming you've got, competent, parents doing that, and I think largely that's what I've witnessed in my life, and understand that to be true. But I mean, my kids, for instance, they had a mixed experience with that. Largely public school graduates, my kids, they're actually learning Latin right now so they can get into the school.
So a public school kid can actually get into
right.
Luther Classical
And this is
College.
where I'm going. This is where I'm going with it. That we will have students from wherever coming in, and when we're vetting them, we're looking for moldability. How, are you willing to change? Even if you're coming from a church that, their worship is a little questionable, right? Are they excited to learn that the better way? There is a better way. It's not just a different way, okay? There's a way of doing something. There's a better way of doing it. We're going to do the better, the best way of doing things. And but yeah, that'll be some work and adjustment from students that that might be a bit of a foreign experience to them. Others it'll be more natural. But yeah, I mean, the kind of students that we're vetting again is, we're looking for those kind of traits. We're not just looking for really smart kids, or ones that mom and dad want to come to the school, but they're not excited about. And that's one reason the Latin prereq is important to us. Is it's not going to be an unbearably high standard. They've got to be some kind of Latin scholar to get in. That's actually been one of the biggest concerns from applicants right now, and parents. Is my kid smart enough to get in? Does he know Latin? Well, if he doesn't know Latin, you can learn it. We've got strategies in place. We've got a crash course you can take before class begins. Come to Casper for a couple of months. It's not that hard of a language to learn Latin when you look at, if you know anything about languages. But if you only speak English, well then anything new language is going to take some work.
Yeah.
And also we've got strategies for the year, where we can get tutoring going on and so forth. But the importance, in my opinion, when it comes to the Latin prereq is it demonstrates, it kind of filters the students that want to be there because they want to be there. That they've looked at our website, they've investigated us, researched us. It's not just because mom and dad want them to go, but they themselves want to go, and they're eager, and they're already exhibiting some work ethic. And yeah, I mean, when you look at our school, we don't have the bells and whistles, right? I've told parents, if you want the indoor swimming pool for the swim team, or you want them to be football stars, you want a football stadium, like, don't even consider our school. We will never have that, okay? We're not going that way. We can keep our tuition low, because we don't have a lot of that, but also in terms of principle, we're just about doing a couple of things, simple things, really well. And it's about educating kids and making sure that how they're being educated is 100% aligned with what a good Lutheran, confessional Lutheran parent would expect. So the values of the home are reflected at our school, by our faculty, by our staff, and that being the same as the church they've come from. So there's no surprises. There's no, I mean, and this thing for myself as a parent, I mean, before I heard of LCC, I've got 5 kids, and my daughter went to a Toronto school, studied linguistics for a year, and just after that, she got married a year after that, but she was done. She got high, whatever, high 90s, whatever. But so the woke stuff, the liberal agenda, the leftist, things that were just always threaded throughout the lectures and the approach, the pedagogy, was just such a turn off. So and so for my kids, my 4 boys, I was ready not to send them to a university or just a trade school, so that they wouldn't, succumb to any temptations to drink the Kool-Aid and buy into a lot of that because of the statistics that follow AIDS, right? Like 30% of kids fall away when they go to university or college, right? So I didn't want my kids to be one of those stats, the collateral damage of the spiritual war that we're all undergoing. So when I heard about LCC, I was in Africa, and I was like, wow, man, I think that's the only school I'm willing to send my kids to, but I don't see that happening. And then, but then, hey, the Lord is good, and then He, He brought me here as president, and that means my kids can go to school here too. So, and I wish I could have gone to this school.
Right.
I say that all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't learn classical ed. I mean, but I wish I did. I wasted so much time in university. I had 2 master's degree, a PhD. A lot of what I learned, that the stuff that I learned that was good was kind of in spite of the professors that were often teaching. And this is something too with classical ed, where people say, well, what's, they pit classical education against everything else, and they say, well, public ed, well, I like this, or this was good, or what's so great about classical ed, like this, like you guys are snobs because you want to do this magic. There's this magical formula to make kids smarter. It's called classical ed, and they totally don't get it. The stuff that they liked in their public ed or whatever ed they did, okay, tends to be the classical components that have not yet been jettisoned from those programs. So I often say, when I was in high school, one of my best things, that one of my greatest memories of high school, public high school, not Christian, secular, was English class Shakespeare, right? Memorizing Shakespeare script, right? The play, and learning about that, the complexities of what he was doing and so forth. And that's basically like a classical thing, right? So, one of the great books. I doubt, I don't know if it's probably too, critical theory probably doesn't let you, do that in school anymore. I mean, it's probably replaced by politicized books that have been written like 2 years ago, right? So by some leftist that, I mean, you know what I'm talking about in terms of how material gets into the curriculum. So, or something like so that's the classical, that's something classical that wasn't named that. Or you say, the debating club, I mentioned that earlier. I used to love that. Well, you don't do that anymore in school because it hurts kids' feelings, right? So you don't want to hurt their feelings, right? Because it's bad for their self-esteem. So with the postmodernism and wokeism and subjectivism, we've just basically dropped standards. And it's another thing, right? You can't fail a kid easily anymore.
Yeah.
Right, you don't want to reward a kid, right?
Well, that's the thing that hurt me, me personally the most in my education throughout the whole time, because it's not hard to get a good grade, and I didn't get the best grades ever, but I got good grades for the most part through high school and college and seminary, and especially in high school and especially actually in college, the grades are inflated.
Right.
And it doesn't do anyone any service to give him an A when he didn't do A work.
Right.
And so I think we have inflation of degrees, we have inflation of GPAs, and you have a lot of people. That's one of the reasons why we're in so much trouble today. Because the people who are now entering into the ruling class, how do I say it politely? I mean, they're kind of morons, a lot of them. They don't know half of what they think that they know. And really, like the great thing about what I learned like in seminary was just the great humility. Like every class was just incredibly humiliating, because I just was, at the end of every class I learned how much I didn't know, and then I would go and try to get caught up, and then I show up to class and there's all this other stuff that I didn't know. And then the professors who've been spending, are privileged to spend their lives studying these things, they will admit that there's so much that they don't know. So then when you get these self-proclaimed experts, it's a really dangerous thing, because most of them aren't experts in anything. They say things, and they've ruined a lot of people's lives. We've seen this with transgenderism. I mean, none of these people are experts on anything. They're just a bunch of pontificators.
Yeah, I mean, you get these, first year university, you go into these big auditoriums with hundreds of kids who are worshiping this young prof who acts as if he knows it all. and you're attracted by the newness of it, and yet it contradicts what you learned at home and what you learned at church. No wonder kids are falling away, right? And that's why Lutheran education is so important. That it's like at a college level, university level, that it's an extension of what you learned at home, what you learned at church.
Right.
That it's not contradicting that. And classical, classical is not for everybody, but I mean, I think it takes it at that higher level because for a bunch of different reasons. But going back to the humility one, yeah, that's something that when you're talking about Christian education and how you live your life, how do you get away from not talking about love, right, and humility? I mean, if you're not talking about virtue, it's all about academics, right? Head knowledge. Well, then you can get away with it, right? Even at a seminary level, you can get away with it. We can just talk about love as a concept, right? As opposed to it being manifested in one's life. And so I think students graduating for instance, our college, even with the general BA, which a lot of people are prejudiced against, because it doesn't give you some practical thing when you're done it, right? I mean, that's one of those arguments out there.
Yeah, I majored in German, which is the most impractical degree.
Right. However, there is something very practical about even a philosophy degree. I mean, a lot of companies would hire philosophers, for instance, game theory, a guy that studies game theory. Why would you care? Well, game theory means you're an expert in strategic thinking. Like you're able to think about like a chess move. Like if he does this, then he'll do this, right? And that's invaluable. Guys that can do that well are invaluable when it comes to the business world. Valuable in the military, dangerous as well, right? So, and so what you find is people that are formed well in school, and education's a gift. It's not an enemy, right? I mean, just like anything, like Augustine says, anything can be, God's gifts are, abused and they're demonic, right? So we see that a lot of demonism in terms of education these days, right? In the abuse of these wonderful gifts of God, but even getting a general BA in a classical Lutheran school like ours, you're going to be a more articulate individual. You're going to be a kinder person. You're going to show better gentlemanly, if you're a man, a gentlemanly attitude, more etiquette, better etiquette, classic etiquette, traditional etiquette. I mean, and the same on the women's side, right? I mean, you're going to know how to talk to people in ways that you'd expect them. I mean, you go to a bank today, right? You can have a smart, bank teller who's 25, and yet you're afraid of going up to him because is he able to problem solve and think outside the box? Is he going to be nice to you? Is he going to be rude? Is he going to be snarky? Is he going to have is he going to have a rainbow flag tattoo on the side of his face, offending you? These are, they're just unacceptable behavior that we put up with, right? What we'll see from our school is again like traditional values, right? Common sense approaches where even if you work at a bank and you're a graduate of a school like ours, that you're a kind human being who's loving that person in front of you, who's doing the job well, who's able to find the solution to the if the little old lady lost her checkbook or whatever, that you're going to find a way to help fix it instead of leave her out in the cold and say it's not my problem, right? And you're going to be praying for her, right? And thinking of a way of evangelizing her, right? I mean, that's what Lutherans do, but it's when you're not in an environment that cultivates that kind of thinking or modeling that, the Holy Spirit's still at work, but we can get in the way too, right? So so I think that one of the reasons we don't have young people in the church is anymore is we thought that we could send them to confirmation for 2 years, and whatever, once a week, a couple hours a week for a couple of years, give them a pastor to deal with the questions and because I don't know what's going on with this theology stuff, and I'm not a pastor, so pastors should teach my kids, right? And then they go to church once a week at best, maybe 2 hours, including Bible study, right?
Yeah.
And we think that's enough to counter the anti-Christian culture around us, so don't blame your pastor that your kid's not Christian anymore because he graduated confirmation with a high grade or something.
Right.
So
Well,
so at our school, we're going back to, well, no, every day you're going to be immersed in
right.
good old-fashioned Lutheran Christianity, and that's, you want to call it an echo chamber, whatever, call it what you want, but I think that's pretty terrific, and I think
Right.
you'd be a fool not to opt for that if you
Well,
could.
and it's not excessive. Like you talk about going to church 2 times a day. So you're going to chapel. So you have matins and vespers. I assume what you're talking about.
Right.
Well, I mean, when you look at what kids do today, I mean, the amount of time the schools take out of these kids, like they don't have time to, like, we can hardly get a youth group going because the kids are too busy. They work full-time jobs going to school. They have all these extracurricular activities, and they're exhausted. And the idea of like getting the, so we're like Lazarus begging for the crumbs from our master's table so that we can just teach the kids a little bit. And then people think, oh, you come to church, 12 times a year, and that's going to keep the kids strong in the faith. Well, no, I mean, yes, anything's possible with God, but you're testing God at that point.
Right.
And we don't want to test God. We want to use the weapons that God has given us, as listed in Ephesians 6, against the principalities that are at war against us. Which leads me to it's kind of a shift in topic, but you are actually, despite what you were saying earlier, you're a very interesting person, and that's why people want to ask you these questions. You've written a bit on demonology, angelology, and I wanted to kind of shift to that because that's kind of what we're talking about. We have, if we were to see, like that story of Elisha with his servant being afraid, and then he prays, God let him see, and then he opens his eyes and he sees the mountain filled with fiery chariots of angels, right? But if we could, I think if God would open our eyes right now, what we would see, I think we would see the fiery angels, but like they would be, we wouldn't be beckoning them, and we'd see a battlefield with a bunch of maimed and dead lying around with demons attacking. And it seems like we're trying to say, hey guys, listen, we're being attacked. We're in war. The bullets are flying. And people say, let's go to the lake. Let's go watch another football game. So I think that we are in spiritual warfare. Can you tell me, how did you become so aware of this? What piqued your interest to write about demonology and angelology and such?
Right. Well, so I'm writing a third book. It'll be coming out with Baker Books this December, and it's it gets kind of deep into the weeds of some of this stuff. And but when I was a kid, I just had a strange level of exposure to this domain of demonic things. I guess you can read my books and you can hear a little bit about that, but where I was involved with like exorcisms, and not by choice, and it's never actually been my choice. It's been people reaching out. Now it's a lot of people know who I am and when it comes to that field, so they reach out to me and ask for advice or help and so forth. So I don't know why that stuff kind of gravitated towards me. But I mean, I'm not the only one. There's probably others like that. But the reason I wrote this book was my first book on it was because there's just so little written on it, and there was so much skepticism surrounding it. So I wanted to write something as an encouragement to other people who are who encounter these kind of the devil in that manifestation. This is the kind of supernatural manifestation, like the demonic, not just regular sin temptation, but when the kind of stuff that Hollywood celebrates with movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it was an encouragement, and then that really it kind of worked because again it just a lot of people just try to find me. And now about once a week, sometimes twice a week, I get inquiries, and so it seems like in my next book, I talk about this, the rise of demonism, and we know what's going on in our world. I mean, there is a spiritual war, as you say, you know, and it's getting worse as we approach the end, and we don't know what that all looks like, and that's not meant to be alarmist, saying I think whatever, some bizarre millennialist view that
Right.
this political leader is the Antichrist or something. I'm just saying Jesus says it's going to get worse as it gets closer to the day, capital D, and there we and here we are. So yeah, we for the medieval people, if they look when they looked around themselves, they didn't imagine empty space. We in our scientistic world, okay, there's up, there's down, there's heaven far away somewhere, and then there's us here, and there's nothing in between, and this concept of hell being in the middle of earth, we would just totally dismiss that. Not saying I believe that, but what I'm saying is we just dismiss it. We don't even consider, we've just so bought into the again, the scientistic.
We're functionally atheists.
Okay, you could put it that way, sure. Now, but the medievals just didn't see it that way. I mean, they just imagined demons and angels were present with them, and if you could see them, I wouldn't be able to see you across the room. It would be so packed in here with these entities, right? So, for better or for worse, right? I mean, for us baptized believers, right? We got a host of angels looking after us, and so when it comes to the demonist stuff, there's, well, let's take a step back. When it comes to school education, I think people should seriously be thinking about questions of, not what does my kid want to do when he grows up? What do I want him to do? What's going to make him the most money? What's going to make me the most popular, dad? But how do I keep my kid saved? Right? How do I make sure my son or daughter gets to heaven? Right? I mean, this is the goal in life, and that's why, again, school isn't about you and in somehow building up your idol. It's about, again, worshiping God and serving your neighbor. So so being attentive to the spiritual war around us, is crucial to being able to battle in there, according to Ephesians as well. So that's something kind of the ordinary when you don't have actually demonic attacks in your life or something like that. But to recognize that same devil's at work, and the moment that you think there's a neutral battle, or my story with COVID and all that, I think that the worst thing you could have said is the COVID days were not spiritual. There was no spiritual dimension, or I've heard people say that. It's like that's the most foolish thing you can possibly say.
Right.
Plus, you deprive, even if you believe that and you say it out loud to other Christians, you deprive those other Christians an opportunity to pray. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a battle. And this is one of the most wonderful things in my experiences with the demonic, is when I've been involved with ministry of deliverance is what we call it. Probably won't have time maybe to unpack that, but this idea of demonic oppression and demonic possession, when people are happy with the results of an intervention that I'm involved with, for instance, someone's being exorcised, they'll often apologize for taking my time, or there's often aftermath in your life when you're involved that way. The devil comes at you, you're all safe by Christ protects you, but there's noticeable changes in it's just that's I guess another question or another topic. But I'd often say there's no reason to apologize. I mean, you've given me an opportunity to read the Word of God here right now. You've given me an opportunity to pray with you and for you. I'm giving you an opportunity to pray with me, for me. So it's always a win-win. You see, there's never, when the devil attacks us, it's never a lose-lose if you're a man of faith. So I think that's one of the blessings of this ministry. But when it comes to this notion of the empty space and being surrounded with angels and demons, my view of that is I just find great encouragement, because I mean, when pastors reach out to me because they've got, you know, an alleged demoniac in their congregation, and we're seeing again a rise in this. I think part of it's multiculturalism, part of it's drugs, all the sexual perversion that we see out there is all, you know, all demonic, like 100%. You know, there's no there's no wiggle room, okay, on homosexual stuff to say it's at some level like acceptable, or you know, and abortion unprecedented. You know, 76 million kids being massacred, right? So
yeah, it's human sacrifice.
So it's really, really, really bad. So I get pastors that are really, you know, rightfully uncomfortable dealing with an alleged demoniac. So a lot of my time is saying, like, don't make such a big deal about this. I mean, just start seeing this as sort of a normal thing. I mean, don't give the devil what he's looking for. Like, don't give him the time of day, frankly. Like, just you know, rebuking the devil. Basically, you know, I believe exorcism, frankly, is a function of the pastoral office.
Yeah.
As opposed to this Roman Catholic view or Pentecostal view that certain people are gifted with, you know, an ability to do to do that where others can't. I think some people are gifted to do things better, but like you're a pastor, you visit people in the hospital because they're dying of cancer. The first time you do that, seeing someone die, for instance, is uncomfortable, but it doesn't change the fact that you've done great ministry, and that next time you'll be more comfortable, right? So it's part of the function, and some people are better at doing grief,
right,
grief stuff. Others are better at youth ministry. Fine, but you're all doing it, and I see demonic stuff as the same thing. It's like don't send this person to the social worker, or the psychiatrist, or the doctor. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, this is your sheep.
Well, like I've even heard, I've talked to Lutheran pastors who have brought demon possessed people to Catholic exorcists,
well,
because they think, well, they know what they're doing and we don't know what we're doing. And that's, I mean, it really goes back to you preparing these young men and women to be missionaries. Right. You're preparing them for spiritual battle.
Right.
And this is why I'd like to, I mean, I don't expect all of my parishioners to send their kids to Luther Classical College. I hope that some do. I really do, and I'm going to encourage it. I mean, obviously, I want to encourage my children to go. But what I do hope is that all of them will take this spiritual battle seriously and say, like, do you want your children to teach their children the gospel, and to teach their boyfriend or girlfriend, future husband and wife, the gospel, and enter into the battlefield every day by strapping on your armor and being ready, because there's no neutral ground. Jesus says, either you are gathering with me or you're scattering. Those are the two options, and we can't be too devoted to Christ, too devoted to His Word. And you're talking about like the Lutheran confessions. I mean, I don't know, who knows who'll be listening to this. Some, yeah, obviously know what you mean, because they've read them. Like a lot of people in my congregation have read them, but a lot of people, they don't get it. But I really encourage everyone just to read the Lutheran confessions, and you'll get what we mean. Like, this is just, it's an exposition on Scripture that is unlike anything else you've ever read, and it clarifies so much. And this is what we want. We want our kids to know the Scriptures and to love them and to know Jesus better. You know, the one who demons shudder at His name. We want them to be servants of the one who causes demons to shudder.
Right. So. Right, and being, I mean, the spiritual battle. Sending your kids to a Lutheran school is going to help them be equipped for that battle.
Mm-hmm.
But again, not everything's equal, right? So as a parent, as a kid, you're obviously going to try, like you used the word you talked about earlier. You want to improve yourself, right? You want to improve your it always drives me nuts when people are so traditional. They're like, well, we've always done this way at church. We're not gonna change, right? We're not gonna introduce a crucifix, or incenses, no, we're not gonna chant, whatever. It's like, even though they can acknowledge that this is a more historical way that's being suggested, right? An improvement. It's like, no, we're not gonna do that. Where anywhere else in your life, right? Well, if you're heavy, you try to improve yourself by getting in shape, right? You do house renos, you try to improve yourself, right? You try to improve yourselves at work, right? But then when it comes to the church, well, now there's no room for improvement, right?
Right.
There's something really telling, I think, spiritually there, and so when we make decisions about our kids' education, we really are again looking for what's the best, and sending your kids to a non-Christian school is. I mean, again, you're talking to someone who went through the public education, non-Christian school system, but I think it was by the grace of God that I turned out okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a totally spiritual war, and we've got to be that much more deliberate as things do get worse in making sure that those instruments, those weapons, are good to go, and you're ready for the good fight. So I mean, I would say. Yeah, I guess that's my pitch for Luther Classical College. I mean, we're not the only ones doing that. I mean, goodness, we'll only be admitting 60 students our first year. We'll cap it off at 300. That's the perfect ratio we're looking for in terms of student-faculty relationships, where faculty can have really good oversight on students, small groups, and all that kind of thing. I mean, I served in the Special Forces for a couple of years. And I mean, when you're working in a small group, it should be kind of a no-brainer. The smaller, right, the better, the more attention that can be given. That's why homeschooling, theoretically, really is the best way, because just look at the ratio of the prof to the kid, right? So
Yeah.
so when people are upset about that, it's like, what's your problem with that? I mean, and then so people aren't often thinking about questions of, again, education reasonably or rationally. Or even what improvement means. They're usually just defaulting to what they did when they were young, what they went through when they're young.
Yeah.
But again, if you're not a critical thinker, you're not able to critically assess how your education was. So when we travel around, we do presentations on Lutheran Classical College. I mean, we talk about doing an old thing new. So the problem with classical education is it's older than everybody in the pews, right? So no one's.
Yeah.
It's not like anyone grew up, immersed in what C.F.W. Walther or Luther would have experienced, right? So we are really resurrecting something that's sort of been dead for a long time. So it looks new, but it's not. But it is better, and it's better on all these other angles.
Well, and history shows it too. I mean, when they dropped the classical education model, education got worse in many ways, and our culture got worse. Well, it's like my wife will always say, people say, oh, well, I went to public school or whatever, and I turned out fine. And she always says, did you? And that's, I mean, but it's not like trying to mock other people, but just of ourselves. And Teresa and I both went to public school. I mean, I went to Lutheran school until 3rd grade, and I was in public school the rest of the time, including college. And yeah, by the grace of God, I got out of it with my faith. And the whole time, like I thought I had a very strong faith, but I look back, and thank God that He got me through it, because it was a very evil time, and so I want my children to be more faithful than I am. I want them to be more pious than I am, and I want them to get a better education. And that last one is the easiest. I mean, in all honesty, because it's just like the method that was used on me was a bad method. So we're throwing that out, and we're gonna go back to a method that actually worked. I mean, I'm trying to classical educate myself as an adult with a full-time job, and here I get to focus on my children now, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it takes, it's risky, right, to be the one that stands out, right? It's a risk, when you do homeschooling, you will be mocked.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as bad anymore, but there was a time, and there was a time when people shunned breastfeeding, right? My wife was very involved with the Breastfeeding League in Canada, and I remember the fight she was undergoing. I mean, that should be, again, a no-brainer, that God, gave women breasts to do that with, and not other things. I mean, we're in Montreal, Canada, where you could show breasts on billboards, for frankly pornographic reasons and so forth, advertisement, and yet, to even put a blanket over yourself in a mall bench or something was, they'd remove you, right? So that's how topsy-turvy, the world was when it comes to just, sensible, classical ways of existing as a human being. So, our college is new. People that want to send, who are signing up with us, who are applying to our school and giving us deposits. I mean, they're taking a risk, but I mean, that's what it is to be Christian. I mean, the disciples took risks when they followed the Lord. And back to demonism, when I'm coaching people through some of this stuff, pastors, for instance, in this ministry, it's I say the same thing. Like they say, well, could I get hurt? Could something happen to me if I'm exercise a demon? I'm just like, yeah, and so what? I mean, when I was in Afghanistan, I mean, we'd be there was we didn't we weren't gunmen, right? We didn't shoot, but we were getting shot at all the time, and I was with guys who were getting wounded, and my ears would be ringing in my head for months after, because I was doing ministry in the front line with people in unique circumstances, right? So when it comes to demonism, it's the same kind of thing. Yeah, you're gonna suffer. I mean, that's called carrying the cross. Like, are we that far, idolizers of idolaters of pleasure, that we just don't even want to touch the cross? So when it comes to, again, schooling too,
Or now it gets to the point where,
sacrifices.
well, it's like we don't want to get sunburned, so we're not going to plant
Right,
seed.
yeah, well,
It's
there
like
you
it's
go.
really getting to that
Yeah,
point.
and I like that. Yeah, I like that. Plant seed, you might get sunburned. So again, it's easy to go along with the flow and avoid something new. Again, we've got all kinds of, as we've got a lot of attraction. People are excited about what we're doing, but we do have critics who just seem to be not happy because we're just new and we're doing something different. And it's like, well, you're just very, short-sighted, myopic. You're just not, like, as a Christian, how can you take that kind of approach? And again, back to the church, right? Well, we've always been doing it this way, so there's nothing wrong with. Well, actually, there is. I can tell you that we're saved by Christ crucified, and that's why a crucifix is the best visual expression of salvation. An empty cross is not the best expression of salvation. Okay, it's not sinful to have an empty cross. Don't get excited that that's what you have in the church. Okay, in your church, whatever. But there's a history as to why you have that. And I can show you with facts and Bible, and history, why this is a better way. And yet you're still going to say, well, no, because this is how we've always been doing it, and I don't want to improve. Well, we should be about improvement. I mean, goodness sake. So again, it's I guess I would say that people who are standoffish when it comes to a notion of a new college, a new classical college, or a new classical Lutheran college, that they take heed to some of those words and go, well, the history of Christianity is about improving and changing the world, and doing old things new, and taking risks, standing up for the gospel, picking up your cross, suffering, getting sunburned, planting the seed. And I'll tell you, as president, I got a lot of sunburn happening.
Yeah, well, God.
But hey, I embrace it. It's like, hey, if you don't, if you need to embrace, if you're not attacked by the devil, then what are you doing wrong? Right? So you got to be doing something wrong if everybody's loving you, right? So.
Well, that's certainly true. Well, God bless you for it. I thank you very much for doing this this podcast in my church office, and you'll be doing a presentation for my church tomorrow morning. But thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And lutherclassical.org. Is that still the website?
That's right, yeah. Thanks,
So,
Pastor.
yeah, so I encourage people to check that out. Share it if you go to another congregation. Tell your pastor about it. Tell people about it. This is a wonderful opportunity, and I really do hope that this will be the first of many, or several Lutheran classical colleges that will help rebuild our congregations with missionaries, with spiritual warriors who are going to be raising their children in the true faith and building a Lutheran culture. So thanks so much. The next episode of the Christ for Us Bible Study podcast will be next Thursday. The topic is going to be women pastors and trans
genderism. So women pastors and transgenderism is a very direct connection to it, as we'll talk about next week. Please like, follow, and share. I really appreciate if you post this on your social media so that other people can follow this podcast. And please tune in again next week.